This video discusses how to restore a zone database, merge zone databases, purge zones and aliases when decommissioning devices, perform zoning operations from an Excel workbook, and execute old CLI zoning scripts via the FOS RESTConf API. The legal disclaimer is here for you to read. Comments, questions, and feedback are always appreciated, and I'm available for consultation. Follow the GitHub link at the bottom of the page for a copy of this presentation and the scripts described herein. As with all of these presentations, additional information can be found in the handout notes. Let's start with zoning from a workbook. All zoning changes are made from a single worksheet. You could do test and validation of zoning changes in advance. You can minimize zone freeze windows when using this script. Special features include purge zones and aliases, and that's where I'm going to spend most of my time talking. There's some wildcard and reject matching searches, which is useful. I'm not going to talk about any of the FICON mainframe stuff, but feel free to reach out to me if you have a mainframe environment. There are two different ways to zone. One is to actually go out to a switch and make some zoning changes. So to do that, you'll obviously need some login credentials. You'll also need to specify the fabric ID of the fabric that you're trying to modify on the target switch. The other approach is to use the output of a data capture. Now that would only be used for test purposes. When you are using a data capture, you're going to need to specify the worldwide name of the fabric that you want to work with. And that's where this -scan option comes in handy, and we'll get to that in a second. -Z, this is the workbook that has all the zone definitions in it. -C, well, that's the name of the sheet in that zone workbook that you're going to make the zoning changes from. This is optional, this -A, you could optionally specify a particular configuration that you want to activate when running this script. If you're not going to activate a zone, I'm assuming you're going to want to save your changes, unless of course you're just in test mode. This -strict option, so normally it's used. Normally you know what zones changes you're making, but sometimes you might want to just use this on several fabrics to clean something out, and if it doesn't exist in a fabric, you don't care. So, and those are the kind of things that are warning, right? If I try to delete an alias that doesn't exist, it doesn't hurt anything. -scan, that's your ability to go and figure out what's in that configuration file. And if you want to, you could optionally output CLI commands. The easiest way to explain how the worksheet works is with examples. This is the worksheet specified with the -sheet option discussed on the previous slide. I suggest making a copy of zone config sample and clear the cell's contents without deleting them so that the pull-down menus are preserved. Assume I want to decommission a server cluster whose HBAs are identified by aliases beginning with server_alias_7 and server_alias_8. The first thing I'm going to do is select alias from the zone object. As you can see, the other zone object options are zone config, peer zone, and zone. The next thing I'm going to do is select the purge option. Other actions are create, add mem, delete, and remove mem. Those are pretty straightforward, so I'm going to limit this discussion to purge, full purge, and ignore. I'll use a reject syntax in the name for the servers. Cells in the match column are used to tell the script how to interpret the name. In this case, I'm using rejects match. Other options are exact, which is the default, wild for wildcard matching, and you could also do a reject search. So in this example, in the first row here, any alias beginning with server_alias_7 or server_alias_8 will be removed from any zone they are used in, and the aliases will be deleted. The script then counts all remaining members that are not in the ignore list. If the count is 0, the zone will be purged. More on ignore list shortly. Purging a zone means it will be removed from any zone configuration it is used in and then deleted. Empty rows are ignored. The next row is an example of how to purge an entire zone. Since full purge is selected, all members of the zone that are aliases will be purged. Then the zone is purged as we just discussed. If I selected purge instead of full purge, the zone would be purged but not the members. That means the zone or zones will be removed from any zone configuration they are used in and deleted, but no action will be taken on the alias members. In the first example, I mentioned an ignore list. With simple single initiator zoning, only storage will be left in the zone, so I'll want to purge the zone. Although servers and storage can usually be determined, there is no reliable way to differentiate server logins from storage logins all the time. The ignore action alleviates this problem by creating a list of members to ignore, then counting the membership list. I typically run the script in test mode without specifying any members to ignore, so that I can use the script output to tell me what members of zones are preventing the zone from being deleted. Script output is discussed in a few more slides. Purge works on peer zones as well. The only difference is that way a peer zone is deemed no longer needed. Instead of checking for members that are not in the ignore list, it checks for regular members and target members. If either membership list is empty, then the zone is purged. The only difference between testing and actually configuring a zone on a switch is that you will always use login credentials in a FID. You may also enable zone configuration with the -A option. A test is always performed before attempting any changes. The zone database is always validated before attempting to make any changes on the switch. No changes are made if there are any errors. Note that since activating the zone also saves the changes, there is no need to specify the -save option. There are three summaries in the output. The first is the ports affected by purge section. This report is intended for cable teams that need to know specific port numbers when migrating applications or decommissioning specific devices. If no purge actions were used in the workbook, this section of the output will be empty. Next is a summary of purge issues encountered. The purge faults contain all of the zones that could not be purged. The second section there, purge faults members only. It's the exact same thing, but it doesn't have the details with the remaining members, and that's just there for simple copy and paste. One of my pet peeves with validation software is that it often stops checking after the first fault and provides little insight as to what or where the fault is. This utility continues to validate each row in the workbook after an error is encountered. The output includes the row numbers as well as a brief explanation of what the problem is. This eliminates the need to correct one problem at a time. This restores from a previously set of captured data. The switch type doesn't matter. It's the same as using restore with the options that are limited to just zoning changes. The only difference is that the CLI option allows you to generate CLI commands. I prefer using this if I'm only making zoning changes because it eliminates the potential of making mistakes to make other changes. Most of these inputs are the same as with zone config that we just covered, so I'm only going to go through them quickly. They're here just for reference. As you can see, the only difference here is that you have that -CLI option. -scan works the same as with zone config. This time I didn't include any login credentials, but you certainly could. This is intended just for copy and paste. The zone merge utility is used to determine if there is anything that will prevent merging zone databases, simplify zone merges, and minimize zone freeze windows, typically to just seconds. Sometimes there is a need to merge zone databases without merging the fabrics. This is typical of SANs with older equipment to move, or they have incompatible switch types. Reach out to me directly if you need to merge zone databases from a Cisco fabric to a Brocade fabric. This is the more common scenario. It's typical of SAN switch upgrades that had to happen in pieces, merging of prod and dev environments, for example, SAN consolidations. Don't forget that there are other fabric parameters to consider, such as unique domain IDs, unique switch names, timeout values, and etc. This script takes a workbook with merge instructions on it as input, and I'm going to discuss that in detail on the next slide. Typically, the active zone configurations are moved. These are specified in the cells in the CFG column as discussed on the next slide. This parameter names the zone configuration that is a result of the merge. If it doesn't exist, it will be created. Effectively, a FOS CFG enable command, if not specified, the zone database is saved. Effectively, a FOS CFG save command. By default, this should have been in test mode. This module, you must specify -T to put in test mode only. -Scan, we've already covered that a few times. And -CLI is optional. That's the name of your file with your CLI commands. But there are two different ways to get input. One is to reach out to a switch directly, and for that you'll require login credentials. One quick comment here, the security self, that is required. It does not default to self. You could also put none in there. The other option, which you can see in that first row, is to include one of those captured data project files. When you do that, you need to specify the Fabric Worldwide name that you want to use in that Fabric. The CFG column, what that's used for is that determines what you're going to merge when you use the -CFG option on the command line. When you use the -CFG option on the command line, you are saying, I want to merge all of these zone configurations into this zone configuration. So this column here specifies which one of those zone configurations from each one of those fabrics that you're going to be merging. The update, what that says is no says do not go out to the switch and make these specific updates. So you're only going to use that row for determining what to merge. Now, obviously, with the zone configuration file, you can't do any updates. And you'll see in those last two rows here, those are actually on the same switch, and you can do that if you want to. You can merge fabrics within the same logical switch, and I just arbitrarily decided, I'll merge one of them, and the other one I won't. As with most of these examples, this is really here for you to copy and paste and edit to suit your own needs. This is worth just a quick mention. SAN engineers often have scripts that generate CLI, or perhaps they got a CLI file from the SAN help team. Using this script is much faster than zoning from a CLI script, and it has the added benefit of validating the zone changes in advance. As with a zoning script, it validates the entire file. If there are any errors, all zoning changes are aborted. And thank you for watching.